So we constantly hear about the absolute magic of AI, right? It's frictionless, it's automatic. But today, we're diving into an explainer based on a fascinating documentary that completely flips that script. It investigates the massive and, frankly, largely unseen physical and human foundations that actually make all this magic possible. Let's see what the source material uncovers.
We've got to start with this pretty staggering perspective. You know how tech leaders are always making these grandiose promises about AI? Well, the documentary captures that vibe perfectly with this quote. It's sort of like we've just discovered a new continent with 100 billion people on it, and they're willing to work for free for us. It really paints artificial intelligence as this infinite autonomous workforce just waiting to serve humanity. But, as the filmmakers argue, that whole free and autonomous narrative, it's heavily manufactured.
And that brings us to the core question of our explainer today. Are these systems really artificial, or are they built on blood and sweat? We're going to peel back the curtain and investigate the invisible human labor actively powering these supposedly self-thinking machines. Because as the source reveals, AI isn't just a bunch of code magically floating in the ether. It's actually a massive accumulation of human effort.
To put the sheer scale of this hidden workforce into perspective, it is mind-blowing. The documentary cites a World Bank report revealing that a staggering 150 to 430 million human data workers globally are the actual foundational engines behind our AI systems. Think about that number for a second. The filmmakers argue this exponentially growing workforce is intentionally kept out of the public eye just to maintain that myth of the perfectly smart machine.
So who is actually doing all this work? Well, the documentary breaks it down, arguing that data tasks are intentionally outsourced to some of the most vulnerable populations across the globe. We're talking about female prisoners in Finland answering construction questions, Ukrainian refugees in Bulgaria marking grocery images just to scrape by, and unemployed or low-wage workers in India classifying image data. According to the source, this is absolutely not a coincidence. It's a targeted system utilizing people who literally have almost no other economic options.
And if you're wondering what this work actually looks like on a day-to-day basis, it is incredibly manual. It goes like this. First, a worker views an image. Then, they manually mark points and draw little boxes around specific objects. Finally, they classify those items so the AI model can learn. I mean, an autonomous car doesn't just naturally know what a pedestrian or a stop sign is. Real people are sitting there, spending hours upon hours meticulously labeling elements on screens so the algorithm can eventually figure it out. And since the real world is always changing, the documentary emphasizes that this manual feeding of data basically never stops.
The source draws a really stark, troubling contrast here. On one side of the equation, you've got these Silicon Valley giants with billion-dollar valuations and immense global influence. On the exact opposite side, the very data workers sustaining those products are earning total poverty-level wages. We're talking maybe $9 a day for intense, full-time labor, or just €4.62 a day in a Finnish prison. It highlights an economic model that, as the documentary argues, heavily relies on underpaid labor extracted largely from the global south.
But the filmmakers point out that the cost isn't just financial, right? It is intensely psychological. The source shares some harrowing testimony from workers like Faustine Makura in Kenya. She was basically tasked with reviewing horrifying, toxic content just so Western users could experience a clean AI tool. Her quote is just devastating. She says, "I realized that I used to have nightmares, especially when I've watched a lot of murder cases or rape cases. It kind of led me to depression." These workers are literally forced to process the absolute darkest corners of the internet. The documentary really dives into the severe psychological toll this takes on the workforce. Constant exposure to extreme violence, and even the horrors of child sexual abuse material, which these workers are forced to moderate to keep platforms safe, leads directly to severe PTSD, anxiety, and insomnia. And here's the kicker. When they try to speak out or seek help, they're bound by incredibly strict non-disclosure agreements and face severe legal threats. As for fighting for better conditions, the filmmakers note that attempting to unionize results in immediate termination. It's described as a really aggressive suppression of a highly traumatized workforce.
Okay, transitioning from human labor, we also need to shift our focus to the physical world. The documentary investigates the massive environmental cost of artificial intelligence, arguing that the whole idea of a weightless, invisible cloud is basically a carefully crafted illusion designed to completely obscure real ecological harm. Because the reality is, it requires massive physical infrastructure. To manufacture AI chips and power these giant server warehouses, the industry gobbles up gargantuan quantities of resources. We're talking copper, cobalt, lithium, and rare earths like cerium and neodymium.
Extracting these materials actively ravages the Earth. On top of that, running these systems requires unbelievable amounts of water and electricity, which the source explicitly ties right back to the global climate crisis. Which leads the documentary to pose this very direct and honestly pretty uncomfortable question. Was your ChatGPT prompt actually that important? It really forces us to pause and reflect. The source urges us to weigh our casual, everyday use of AI, like asking a bot to write an email or generate a funny image, against the surprisingly heavy ecological and human costs required to run that single query.
Now you might be wondering, why on earth would tech companies willingly accept these massive harms? Well, the documentary points to their ultimate, heavily funded goal, artificial general intelligence, or AGI. As many of you probably know, this is the race to build a technological system that performs as well as or exceeds the very best humans in every single cognitive domain. The filmmakers argue that hitting this specific finish line is the core driver behind the entire industry right now.
But what exactly fuels that drive? The source points to a whole cluster of Silicon Valley ideologies known as TESCREAL. Yeah, it's quite the acronym. It stands for transhumanism, extropianism, singularitarianism, cosmism, rationalism, effective altruism, and long-termism. What's absolutely crucial to understand here is that L at the end, long-termism. This is a philosophy that heavily prioritizes the distant future of humanity way over the present day. According to the source, this ideology envisions a genuinely bizarre, almost sci-fi trajectory. Step 1, build a controllable AGI. Step 2, use that AGI to radically re-engineer the human organism. And Step 3, colonize the accessible universe with immortal post-humans. I mean, it literally sounds like the plot of a science fiction novel, right? But the documentary emphasizes that this multi-galactic post-human utopia envisioned for thousands of years from now is actively influencing the real-world decisions being made by major tech executives today.
The documentary provides a quote that perfectly illustrates how this plays out ethically. Speaking to the long-termist justification for exploiting the global south, the source highlights this exact mindset. Their harms are a molecule and a drop in the ocean, insignificant when you compare it to the massive, enormous, unfathomable goodness of the future. According to the filmmakers, current human suffering and environmental destruction are simply viewed by these ideologies as a completely justifiable sacrifice for tomorrow's paradise. Let's juxtapose these two contrasting visions, as presented by the source. On one side, you have the promised utopia, a multi-galactic technological paradise built for immortal post-humans spearheaded by a self-proclaimed elite. On the flip side, the present reality, traumatized data workers, dried-up rivers, and aggressively extracted mines. The documentary critiques this as a profoundly anti-democratic vision of a distant future, one that relies entirely on very real, dystopian conditions on Earth right now just to build it.
To close things out, we leave you with the documentary's final, lingering question. Who will be the future victims in the belly of AI? It's a question that directly challenges the overarching narrative that more technology automatically equates to human progress. I really hope this look at the source material helps you see the invisible infrastructure behind the AI revolution in a completely new light. Always keep questioning the tools you use, and thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.